Hi, how you all doing? My name is Tyler Griffin. I'm the Vice President of the Winthrop College Republicans.
And my name is Lovett. I am the Secretary of Affairs for the Winthrop College Republicans.
And I'm Mick Mulvaney, and I'm a congressman, evidently. So.
Yep, we're very excited to have him here today. He represents us in the 5th District, and he's a member of the House Freedom Caucus. So, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. This is kind of cool.
Yep. So we're going to start off right out the bat. As a congressman, what issues are most important to you?
Well, I mean, it's been the same issue since I've been there, which is the debt and the deficits and the amount of money that the government is borrowing. The thing that's so frustrating to me right now is that it's just not as, for lack of a better word, sexy an issue as it was in 2010 or 2012. People don't care as much about the debt as they used to, which is really bizarre because the debt is actually more of a problem now than it was 4 or 5 years ago, because it's bigger now than it was, and it's continuing to get larger. We continue to borrow more and more. And I really do think it's the one existential threat we face as a nation. And I met with this morning with some folks who want to talk about the threat of EMP, electromagnetic pulse. That's real. Other folks worry about the threat of domestic terrorism or international terrorism. That's absolutely real. You know, some folks want to come in and talk about global warming. Those are not existential threats to the United States of America. Us going broke is, and that's sort of still the most important issue for me.
It seems like a lot of people have very short memory, because like the time, you see the debt clock, it keeps getting bigger, but it's like all this other stuff still going on, so people seem to forget about.
How many presidential candidates have you heard talk about the debt?
The one that did all the time job, isn't running anymore.
16th. Yeah, he was my guy.
Yeah, he was mine also.
That you showed a lot of frustration right there with dealing with the debt.
Yeah.
But my question is, what is the most frustrating part of the legislative process? Getting that debt legislation on the table.
The most frustrating part of the legislative process in its entirety, and I've had a lot of time to think about this, because I was in Columbia, you guys know before, that I've seen how legislatures are supposed to work and can work well. You might not like the outcome, but they work, they function, okay? And then you go to Washington and it doesn't really function, and as I sit here and I try and figure out why that is in my own head, I think this is it. I think I'm elected by a relatively small group of people. That's 700,000 people, but they're in this little tiny part of South Carolina. And every other member of Congress represents about 700,000 people. And then you get senators, and they might represent a couple 100,000 from, say, Montana to 50 million in California. But none of us are elected nationwide, and we're elected to sort of represent our people. And that's the way it's supposed to work. There's only one person who's represented nationwide, and that's the president. And I think what you're seeing, since I've been in Congress, is a president who, for the first time in my adult life, isn't interested in uniting the country. That, yeah, we've always had, Republicans who think one thing and Democrats think another. That really hasn't changed. You can talk a lot about the culture of Washington change. I don't think so. I think it's always been somewhat provincial, in that you represent your group of people. That's what we're supposed to do. And the president was supposed to be the one to sort of weave us together and figure out a way to get the Republicans and the Democrats to work together. Ronald Reagan was a Republican president who worked with Democrats in the House and Senate. Bill Clinton was a Democrat president who worked with Republicans in the House and Senate. And the process still functioned. This president doesn't seem to have had any interest in doing that in the last 8 years. And I think that's what's different, and that's the most frustrating thing. It's not that Congress is broken, it's that we have no leadership at the top that's interested in trying to find a way to weave our differences together to find that sort of common ground to allow the system to function. So that's the most frustrating thing to me, and I hope it gets a lot better in November.
Yeah. Well, going specifically into Congress, as I said earlier, part of the House Freedom Caucus, and last year that caucus was a big part in switching House leadership from John Boehner to Paul Ryan, and he wanted, one of the main aspects that he wanted is he wanted your endorsement before he actually took the job.
Oh yeah.
So
he needed our votes to get the job.
Yeah. Do you, now that it's almost been a year since then, do you think he's fixed some of the issues that you had with the prior leadership?
Oh, I know that he has, and I know that Paul, for some reason gets a bad name in the right-wing press. People are calling for his head already, and I'm like, wait a second, this was the guy who just in 2012 was the conservative balance to the moderate Mitt Romney. And conservatives were all excited when they put Paul Ryan on the ticket, because this was our guy, right? And then he's the same person he was in 2012. I'm not sure what's changed, but what has he done to fix things? I'll give you specific examples, one or two, okay? One of the big complaints we had against John Boehner was that he would never tell anybody what we stood for. I had been there 4 years, and John Boehner, 5 years actually, John Boehner was the Speaker of the House. We had never offered an alternative to Obamacare. Never. Never, not a single time. We said, we'll repeal it. What do you want to replace it with? Oh, we don't talk about that. We'll just talk about it. It's bad. Yeah. Obamacare, bad. We're not for Obamacare. Vote for us. That might fire people up for a very brief period of time, but sooner or later people want to know what you're for. And we thought we had some really good ideas on how to fix the healthcare problems in this country. And Boehner would never talk about it, and would never put people in charge of coming up with, putting them on paper and putting committees to work. And when Paul, came in and said he wanted to be speaker, and we talked to him about it, he's like, look, I think one of the things that John has done wrong is that he's not told people what we stand for. And we need to tell people who we are, and it has to be more than we're just not Democrats. It has to be more than that. 4 or 5 weeks ago, we introduced a series of major initiatives. It's called A Better Way. You can find it on the internet by Googling GOP Better Way. And it'll take you to the main page where our ideas on the really big pictures of the day. How do you want to deal with international terrorism? How do you want to deal with health care? How do you want to deal with tax reform? How do you want to deal with reestablishing the balance of power between the branches of government? The really, really big things that we think Republicans stand for. Paul's put 6 of those initiatives out in the first year or 9 months of having been the Speaker of the House. John Boehner didn't do any of that in the 5 years that he was Speaker. So that's one of the things that I point to and say, yeah, it's a lot different. There's another thing as well, which is that John would freeze conservatives out. He always seemed to be interested in how to stick it to the conservatives. He never understood that the wave election of 2010. He never understood that grassroots movement that made him the Speaker. He thought it was something magical that he did with the contract, the Pledge to America, which nobody read, right? He envisioned himself as the next Newt Gingrich. And he never got why we were there. He was Speaker because of the conservative wave of 2010, which some people call the Tea Party wave. Paul gets that, and now every time that he convenes a group of people in a room like this to talk about strategy, for example, to talk about those 6 big ideas, the Better Way program that we came up with, conservatives were at the table. That had never happened under the John Boehner administration. So there's 2 specific examples of how Paul has really changed the way that Congress is run. Do we have anything tangible to show for it? No, but that's because to change Congress, for the most part, takes laws to be passed. And that means getting the president's signature or having a veto-proof majority, and we're not going to get that. We need to win some national elections, but we've done a lot to fix the House in the last 9 months.
That was great. That was great. You are one of the first, or the first, member of Congress to actually come out and support term limits.
Yeah.
In 2014, you introduced a bill seeking that would call for term limits. And right now, even at the state level, we're seeing a rise of pro-term limit legislators coming in, and even you have some running in the congressional races as well. Yeah. With this growing resentment towards career politicians and the rise of term limit advocates. Do you think a constitutional amendment is something we'd see in the near future?
Yes, but not in the fashion that we think about it. I think you are a long way. In fact, you're never going to get, in my lifetime, to the place where enough members of Congress vote to change the Constitution. That's the traditional way we've done amendments to the Constitution. It passes 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate goes out to the states for ratification. And I just don't see it. I did do the bill this year. I did a bill in previous Congresses as well. We started as a 6-year term limit in the House, 12-year term limit in the Senate. And a couple of House members come to me and say, why is the House less important than the Senate? So we changed it to 12 years in the House and 12 years in the Senate to try and bring some balance between those 2 services. And we get, the pro-term limit caucus is probably 40, 50, 60 people at most. You need 190. That is a far cry. Right. It's a real far bridge to carry. So I just don't think you're going to see it anytime soon through the traditional fashion. Now there's a possibility to change that, which is if folks back home got fired up about it. Like we got rid of earmarks because people back home got upset about earmarks, and politicians started worried about losing their jobs if they voted for earmarks. That's a great way to change a politician's mind about something, convince him or her they can lose their job. Right. They're not convinced they're going to lose their job because they're against term limits right now. If the folks back home can change that thinking in their elected officials and start asking them where you stand on term limits, maybe that'll change. But Failing that, I've started to sort of open my mind to this Article 5 Convention of States. There's another way to change the Constitution by going to a Convention of States. I've worked very closely with some of the people at the national level who are promoting this. It would bypass Congress. And there seems to be, again, the reason I'm not giving a full-throated support is I'm still not 100% convinced. I'm worried about a runaway convention and things, the convention doing stuff we don't want them to do. But there does seem to be a way to do an Article 5 Convention of States that simply focuses on one topic. And if this was that topic, you might actually have a chance to change the Constitution. I think the two best things you can do to fix the country would be a term limits amendment to the Constitution and a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. That's where the breakdown exists. It's career politicians who have access to a printing press. That's why Washington is so much different than Columbia. That's why Washington doesn't function, or one of the reasons it doesn't, and Columbia does.
But if you think about one of the reasons that term limits, that bill this isn't able to pass is because there's so many people in Congress where if they voted for that, they're also just kind of kicking themselves out of office. So it's just like,
yeah, well, I mean, there's ways to deal with that. You could say, look, we'll grandfather you in, right? So if you've been there 20 years, it applies to the next person in your office. So there's ways to deal with that. But the real truth of the matter is there's a lot of folks who just don't believe in term limits. They look at this as a job for life. They look at it as a career, as a profession. And I have many members, colleagues of mine in Congress who say, look, now that they're here, they think they're there forever. And they act as if they're there for them forever. And that really does make them a different type of member of Congress. I just don't think it's healthy.
Like to me, if George Washington can stop being president after 2 terms, you can stop being a congressman after so many.
I tend to agree.
Yeah.
So, and I used to be sort of up in the air about term limits generally, but then you get there and you see what redistricting does, what gerrymandering does. You see what the power of the incumbency does. I mean, I fought against the power of incumbency when I ran the first time, and I hated it. And now I'm the incumbent, and I love it, right? And you can't allow yourself to think like that, right? You can't say, well, now that I'm here, I'm good. I'm going to. Either you have a principle, and it is what it is, and the principle is that term limits would be healthy for the country.
With all the frustration in this election, with some Republicans and Democrats, who are sided with the party, but cannot come out and support the nominee. With that being said, how important is it for those people to get out and vote because of the vacant Supreme Court seat and other seats that may follow?
It's probably the biggest issue that is out there that doesn't get a lot of attention. And you're absolutely right to ask the question that way, because there are Democrats who don't support Mrs. Clinton, there are Republicans who don't support Donald Trump. But for both of those folks, if you're on either side, and if you're engaged in the political process, and everybody should be, because people say, well, I'm not interested in politics. I'm like, that's too bad, because politics is interested in you. That this appointment of this next Supreme Court justice could take the court to the right for the next 40 years, or to the left for the next 40 years. I mean, seriously, you could find somebody who's 40 years old, 45 years old, who's qualified, who's a liberal Democrat or a conservative Republican, and they could be on the court, for the rest of your lives. I mean, that's kind of impressive. So it is probably the biggest issue. That people talk about it a little bit, but I don't know if yet it's sort of sunk in as to how significant it is. So the who gets to appoint judges the next 4 years could set the direction of the Supreme Court for the next 50.
Earlier you mentioned the differences between working in Washington and working in Columbia. But what's the main difference between those two legislators?
We don't have any rules. People don't know this. If you've been, and you guys may have familiar with the state legislature, you go down to Columbia, and a lot of kids go down and they see us, and we sit at the desks, and there's a rule book in Columbia. In the Senate, when I was in the Senate, we had Jefferson's Rules of Order, Jefferson's Manual. I can't remember what the name of the book was in the House, but we had the Rules of Order. The different groups have Robert's Rules of Order. I can't remember who we used in the House. And they are parliamentary rules. For example, we would get to the Senate every single day, and there would be the calendar of all the bills that had been filed, that had gone through committee, and were up for a vote that day. And we could bypass them by doing some things, or we could debate them and vote on them by doing some things, and we knew what was going to be discussed that day. Congress has none of that. Congress is set entirely by the Speaker of the House. Speaker determines what bills we're going to talk about this week. The Speaker determines what amendments to those bills will be allowed. The Speaker determines how long the debate will be on those amendments. The Speaker determines how long the debate will be on the overall piece of legislation. The Speaker determines who gets to talk about the amendments, who gets to talk about the bill, who manages the amount of time that's available on the floor. And then the Speaker picks the time of day that we will actually vote on it. So it's not a dictatorship, but it's not a rules-driven system. Mm-hmm. And the reason that rules are so important, and the reason that rules function, and Thomas Jefferson spent a lot of time on this as he helped fashion the parliamentary procedures in the United States that many states, like South Carolina, use, Congress used to use and then threw away. The reason is that it allows the minority to have certain rights. It allows certain subgroups within the majority to have rights. Mm-hmm. It allows the majority a certain amount of rights. But everybody understands what the playbook is, what the rules are, and they're the same for everybody. Mm-hmm. And they're the same from one speaker to the next, from one party control to the next. The rules are the rules. Mm-hmm. That's the way it works in Columbia. That's the way it works, I think, in every state capital. That's not the way it works in Washington, D.C. And that contributes to what people accurately describe as the dysfunction in Washington. I'll give you an example. There's a bill currently pending that has over 250 co-sponsors. Okay, these are people who are saying, yes, not only do I like the bill, not only will I vote for the bill, but I'm going to put my name on this bill as an original co-sponsor. Okay, we can't even get a hearing on that bill. It's a 2-year budget program. It would allow us move us to 2-year budgets, which is either biennial or biennial. I can't remember which was which. And because there's a small group of people in the House and the leadership levels who don't like that bill has never even had a hearing, let alone a vote on the floor. That's just perverse. Mm-hmm. If that happened in Columbia, it would have already been through committee. It would have been, maybe the leadership puts the squeeze on people to get them to vote against committee. That's fine. That's playing by the rules. That's how it works, right? Your vote's your vote. But at least the process would have played out the way everybody knows it's supposed to, because that's the way the rules are written. In Washington, we don't play by rules. We play by the whimsy of who happens to be in charge at any particular time.
Well,
encouraging, huh?
Yeah.
So now you know why. Look at me. I'm 27 years old, and look at me. I used to be 6'3" with a full head of hair. So.
Well, from there we'll go on to personal questions, Mr. Congressman. What is something about you that many people do not know?
Let's see. But don't know. Goodness gracious, I've been so public with so many things. I don't know if I keep any secrets anymore. Some people don't know I have triplets. We have the 16-year-old triplets. 2 of them are at the governor's school now in Hartsville, South Carolina, governor's school, science and mathematics. And then on the boys in Indiana High School down where we live in Lancaster County. Boy, I don't know what it folks do. I used to play a lot of golf when I was younger.
Okay.
I still play just enough to keep me competitive with Mr. Gowdy, although he beats me. He cheats. So you can tell him I said that. Gowdy cheats. Now I spend most of my free time in the garden. In fact, I love Facebook, and I hope we get a chance to talk about the outreach we do. Mm-hmm. But I have sort of become this late convert to Facebook, and now that someone who's almost 50 likes Facebook means that it's destined to failure, because it's the young people who dictate what the technology is that we use. But I will get more interest oftentimes on my Saturday afternoon Facebook posts about my garden mm-hmm. than I will on the debt or ISIS or immigration. And some people seem to just like the fact that I am a normal person, mm-hmm. and I have a tractor and I have a lawnmower and I work in the garden and I raise bees and I have figs and raise tomatoes, grow tomatoes. And I like that. I like not only reminding people that I'm still a normal person, I try and be a normal person, but I'm fairly normal and I do the same stuff that everybody else does mm-hmm. When I'm not at work.
Yeah, I seen you came up on my news feed one day, and I seen you were actually having conversations with different people in the comment box, in the comment section.
Oh, yeah.
You would post something, let people know what was going on and how you felt about it, and then you would go down to the comment box and debate.
Yeah, we actually call those Facebook question answers FBQAs. We do about 50 a year. In fact, I'm doing one after I'm done here. Mm-hmm. We'll have lunch with our intern from the office, nice young woman who y'all know, Tabitha. She's worked for us, done a great job this summer. We're going to take her to lunch, and then I'm going to do a Facebook question and answer this afternoon for about 90 minutes. And you can effectively ask me anything. And we do those about 50 times a year, and they are great. In fact, I'll tell you this, one of the best stories I've got about this, people say, oh, you're just out there, you're just trying to look like you're, no, I'm actually interested in what people have to say, and I can prove it to you. We're on there a year ago, right? And someone sends in a link to an article, says, Congressman, have you seen this? And it was about payments from the Social Security Administration to people who are over 115 years old, okay? Now, there aren't that many. In fact, I'm not sure there are any people who are 115 years old. There may be one or two in the country, right? We're just paying a couple thousand people. And I'm like, you know what? That's wrong. So I went back to D.C. the next week, and I was working with a Democrat from Florida on another bill. His name is Patrick Murphy. He's a really good guy. Republicans hate it when I say that because he's running for Senate. I got news for you. He's a really good guy. Yes, he's running against Marco Rubio, and I think you should vote for Marco Rubio, but Patrick Murphy's a good dude, even though he's a Democrat. So Patrick and I, and we played golf against each other and baseball against each other, so we knew each other a little bit. We're looking for something we could do together. And I said, Patrick, how do you feel about this? He goes, Mick, the Republicans and Democrats, we disagree on the role of government, because we sort of want big government, y'all sort of want small government, but don't any of us like bad government, and this is bad government, so let's see if we can fix it. So we had a bill called the Improper Payments Bill of 2015, passed by the House, passed by the Senate, signed into law by Barack Obama, President of the United States, and now is the law of the land, and it started as a comment on the Facebook page on my website, or on my Facebook page. So I think that's pretty cool, and that's why we use it, is that we want to know what's important to people. There is, any politician who tells you he or she knows everything is lying to you. And most of us think we know everything, and we don't. And the fact that folks can participate in that process, ask me questions, give me suggestions, I think is extraordinarily healthy and extraordinarily helpful to me in my job.
So you just went over like a very big success story for one of your town halls, because that's Facebook town halls, and that's amazing. But you do a lot of town halls. You go out and you talk to people, and that's great for you to be that connected to your constituents. What's one of your most memorable moments from a town hall?
That's a great question, because we've done the story I've just told you about the most memorable about a Facebook Q&A, but there's great stories in those, because I get questions about everything. I get questions about gardening, I get questions about tractors, I get questions about fantasy football. But those are the Facebook deals. My favorite live in-person town hall meeting, we've done 100 of those maybe in the last 6 years, was actually here in Rock Hill up at the Victory Center when we did it for the NAACP. And I think I've done it with them now 2 or 3 times. And one time we actually went almost 4 hours on just asking questions, and it was it. And I stayed until the last person left. In fact, the guy who came out at the end, Melvin Poole at that time was the president of the NAACP. He came out and he said, look folks, that's it, we got to go home. This Mulvaney's going to kill all of us if we don't get the congressman home. So, and then somebody made a comment afterwards. He said, look, we really appreciate you doing this. None of us are going to vote for you, but we really appreciate you doing it. I said, you know what, I know that none of you are going to vote for me, but I still represent you, and I still want to know what you think. And just as importantly, you have, I feel very strongly about this. I don't have, as an American citizen, I don't have the right to have Barack Obama vote the way that I want him to vote. That's not my right. I have a right to vote for him. Everybody knows about that. I do have a right, or at least I feel I have a right, for him to tell me why he votes the way that he does, why he promotes the issues that he does. The folks at the NAACP probably don't vote for me for the large majority if you look at statistical histories, right? But I represent them, and they have the right to know why I voted the way that I did on the issues that I did. And if they're going to disagree with me, and they will, and 40% of it at the district at any one time is disagreeing with me, I just want it to be for the right reasons. And it's not because I'm not accessible, it's not because I don't like them, it's not because I think I'm better than somebody else because I'm elected to. If they want to disagree with me because I vote the way they don't want me to, that's the way the system is supposed to be. So that's what I've tried to do. I mean, I'll talk to anybody. I've talked to I talked to the retired Democrats of York County one time. That was great. I thought they were going to beat me over the head with their walking sticks. But so I'll talk to anybody because I represent anybody. I went to the inauguration of President Obama in 2013, January 2013, and there was a newspaper there. It was the Wall Street Journal, and I was walking in to go take my seat, and they put a microphone in my face, and they said, "Congressman, why are you here?" And I'm like, what do you mean why aren't you here? Well, so many of your Republican colleagues are not here. And I'm like, look, 45% of the people that I represent voted for this gentleman for president. I'm going to go represent them because they can't be here. And it's a tremendous honor. I mean, even if you don't like the president, you go for the institution. So anyway, that's one of my favorite town hall meetings, is doing it for 4 hours at the NAACP and having somebody walk up to me afterwards and say, we're not voting for you. So it's okay. So I don't do it for votes. I do it because it's my job.
Yeah, that's great. So since you can talk to anyone, if you could have a discussion with any president, living or deceased, who would it be?
Ooh, that would be really cool. I don't know. It might be this one, but I don't think I could convince him of anything different, so maybe I'd pass on that. I think it'd be cool to talk to one of the really, really early guys, you know, and say, look, here's where we are today. What do you think about that? Because Jefferson might roll over in his grave. I think that would be really cool to see what would happen. It might be nice to talk to some of the really big names, Roosevelt, for example, and say, okay, you wanted the New Deal. You wanted, you know, here's where we are. Is this what you wanted? Is this have we gone further than you wanted to? Have we gone too far? You know, and then I think it'd be cool. You know, the guy that I sort of idolized when I was a young man was John Kennedy. He was a Democrat because I'm Roman Catholic, and he's the only Roman Catholic president ever. And if you're a Catholic boy, you know, born between say like 1960 and 1975, you're named after one of the Kennedys. I served with Joe Kennedy from Massachusetts. So I meet Joe Kennedy in the locker room, right? And I can't remember his first name because there's so many Kennedys. You know, I can't remember if it's Patrick or Joe or whatever. And he introduced. I said, I called him Pat. He says, I'm Joe, and I said, I'm really sorry. So I'm named after my great uncle. And I just looked at him. I said, Joe, I'm a 49-year-old Irish Catholic male born in this country. I'm named after one of your great uncles. We all are, so that doesn't really help. So I think it'd be cool to go back and talk to him, you know, given where the country was at the time, given where his party was at the time. He thought government was too big. He thought government was too intrusive. He thought taxes were too high. He thought that a rising tide raised all ships. He's a Democrat. Wonder if he'd be a Democrat today. That might be a fun conversation to have. So I know that's not a specific answer in picking one, but there's some interesting questions you might want to ask a bunch of different guys.
Sounds good.
Now, what age did you come to realize that, you know, I'm a conservative?
Ooh,
So
wow.
we've done so early on, you know. So
Yeah, it wasn't in college. You know, maybe I think when I was younger, I was a conservative Southern Democrat, which meant that, you know, I always knew I was pro-life. Okay, that's the way I was raised. That's what my church teaches. I agree with it. I think it's right. So I knew that, and I knew that I had this sort of libertarian streak in me, which was just leave me the hell alone, right? I mean, so back when I was in college, it wasn't really clear which party that was associated with. Because both parties sort of had that element within them. There were conservative Southern Democrats, there were some libertarian-leaning Republicans. Ronald Reagan was a libertarian-leaning Republican. But I think I supported Bruce Babbitt for president in 1988. He was an Arizona Democrat. He got swamped in the primaries. Another case of me picking the. I don't think I've ever picked somebody to wins in a presidential primary. But my guess is by the time I was out of law school, you know, my formative years. Ronald Reagan became president when I was 13 years old, and I was 21 when he left, and that was sort of my formative years. So I guess by the time I got out of college, maybe I didn't know what party I was in, but I knew I was conservative. And like I said, there was still a day when there was a place in the Democrat Party for conservatives. That's pretty much gone now. That the conservative wing of the Democrat Party is just history. So maybe that's a better answer, which is I knew I was conservative by the time I got out of school.
What would you say to young voters who are frustrated about the political process and who feels at times their voice is not being heard?
Well, their voice is heard just as much as anybody else. In fact, if they did it right, their voice would be heard more than any other group. People don't realize this. When we break our generations down into demographic groups, so you've got the baby boomers and the echo boomers and the Generation X and Generation Y and then whatever y'all are, which are millennials, I think is what we call you folks. That 18 to 30 group, okay, is the largest demographic group in the country this election cycle. It's the first time since my parents turned 18 in 1960 that their demographic group is not the largest in the country. So they've been that sort of that you know, that crocodile, that piece of food in the middle of the snake that's just moved through. But now y'all's generation is the biggest generation in the voting blocks, and y'all can have a dramatic impact on this election, all the way from the president all the way down, if you wanted to. I recognize the fact that people sort of get turned off by it, but like I said, you have to get interested in politics because it's interested in you. I went and I spoke to USC Lancaster a couple years ago, and I laid out for them how the deficits and the debts were going to impact them. And they said, they didn't say it like this, but the question effectively was, why is it that we borrowed so much money to give ourselves things now and chose to pay for it later? And I said, because the people who got the things now vote, and the people who pay for it later don't. You know, and if you're 65 years old and you want another benefit in Medicare, why not? You know, you're not paying for it. And the 65-year-old people vote. The 3 or 4 largest precincts in South Carolina, not only in terms of the size of the precincts, but the percentage of who votes at that precinct, so the biggest turnout, are all in retirement communities. Most of them down in Beaufort, but one of them over in Indian Land in Lancaster County. So folks that are 55 and above vote. Folks who are 30 and under don't. So if you don't like the way that people who vote, squeaky wheel gets the grease, man. That's just, you hate to think that that's how the government works. But we're ordinary people in unusual jobs, and we respond to ordinary kind of stimuli, and the squeaky wheel gets the grease here, just like it does in school and in life and in the family and at church. So you don't vote, you're probably going to get the short end of the stick.
All right, well, thank you very much for that. We really appreciate you coming out and doing an interview with us. It was very informative, very exciting.
Happy to do it. I'm going to put a plug in now for the Facebook page. It's you can go look for Rep. Mick Mulvaney, and that's my official page. And then that's where we do the Facebook question answer series. Now, since this is the College Republicans, right? So I can say this as well. There's also a campaign Facebook page, which is a different campaign page. You got to go look for Mulvaney for Congress for Facebook. And that's where we deal with all of the campaign issues. People ask me all the time, I'll be on the Facebook Q&A. On the official page is my role as a congressman. They ask me a question about my election, and I'm like, I can't talk about it on that page.
Right.
I also can't tell them on that page to go look at this other page.
Right.
Okay, because this one is funded with taxpayer dollars, and obviously you can't do that on campaign. So you should be, if you're interested, a member of both of them. The official page, which is Rep. Mick Mulvaney, and the other one, which I think is either Mick Mulvaney for Congress or Mulvaney for Congress. And that's where you can get the best information about what's happening in Washington and policies and all the comments and questions we get from people. And on the other page, you get all the updates on the campaign and how you can get involved.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for coming out. We hope
Thanks for what you do. Listen, I got to go back to the Facebook Q&A the other day. Somebody asked me, they said, you think it'd be a good idea to start a York Young Republicans group? And I said, look, I think it'd be great to start a York Young Republicans. I think it'd be great to start a York Young Democrats, a York Young Libertarians, and a York Young Green Party. You got to figure out a way to get young people involved. Thank you for doing your part in that.
No problem.
Thank you so much for coming out.
Appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
It's good to see you.
Yes, sir.